with the first pick in your podcast hearts. This is the Pick Six podcast on the week leading up to the NFL draft. It's the off season, but it's a busy time. We've got the NFL draft. We have transfer portal. We have off season hoops roster transactions going on. There's a lot happening behind the scenes. Welcome into the podcast with Jimmy Watkins and Sam McKewon. I'm Evan Bland with the Omaha World-Herald. Took a week off, and we are back with some more time between the spring game and now. And again, it's a busy time, even though there aren't a lot of games being played. Lots and lots going on behind the scenes. How have you guys been? Just kind of getting back into the swing even after the spring game, and kind of moving on to what's next.
Fell asleep on the couch, slept for 13 hours last night. It was great. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
You slept on the couch for 13 hours?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm
Nice.
impressed.
Yeah. About 7:30 to 8:30 this morning. It was great.
I'm impressed, Jimmy.
We haven't traveled a ton on football trips together, Jimmy, but I do know that you fall asleep. You kind of have this narcoleptic tendency where you're just out. You know, we might be, if we share a room or whatever, you're in the bed over there and you're just like
It doesn't
out
take
all
me
of a
long.
sudden. And
And
it's
if
like,
I'm tired, I'm tired.
Okay, so
It's a wrap.
That jives with my limited experience with that. How about you, Sam?
How am I? I'm okay. You know, like we're past spring football. We're into sort of portal season. There's a lot going on in a lot of different areas in sports, and so you know, I'm trying to regather for the summer, get my passport together for Ireland, trying to get like everything ready to go for what I think is going to be a pretty monumental summer inside of Husker football. Whether or not they win games in the fall, I don't know, but it's going to be, you know, that's just kind of how I view it. Also watching basketball, you know, watching the NBA, enjoy that. The NFL draft this weekend, for people who have been longtime listeners of the podcast, I am an avowed fourth-generation Bears fan, and so that's a big deal. And so I'll be watching that. I'll also be watching for Huskers who are going to potentially get drafted. So the Bears rarely do well in the NFL draft. They have a hard time recruiting or signing, drafting receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends. Those are all real challenging roles for them. You usually get good running backs, incidentally. Matt Forte, good running back.
Yep.
David Montgomery's not bad.
David Montgomery's good. They find that one, and they get good linebackers. They're good at that, those two positions. But, yeah, year two of Justin Fields, not all that excited about it, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, we're going to get to the draft. We're going to get to some other sort of current Husker news as well. But let's start with the portal, because we talk about the season coming up next year. A lot that's going to happen in the next week to few weeks is really going to shape the outlook for what Nebraska may or may not be able to do next year. And so, as you may have heard, May 1st now is sort of that next key date to look at, because that's when players, college football players, have to be in the portal. So that's the last time that you can enter and be eligible for the upcoming season. So we would expect a busy week, certainly with players leaving programs, probably including Nebraska. And then we're going to have some decisions of guys coming in, and then you'll also just kind of see who's in that player pool for you to recruit moving forward if you're a college program. So let's kind of break it down a little bit by, first of all, who might join Nebraska moving forward. Obviously, defensive line is a key position with all the attrition that's hit them. Who do you think, I guess, who are the main contenders right now, and what are the chances Nebraska has of fortifying that position especially?
Well, you know, because you've talked to O'Shawn Mathis's mom, you've done more reporting on this than either one of us. O'Shawn Mathis is the top priority for Nebraska. So if you're talking about positions that are in great need, the way that we now look at Nebraska's defense, we would say that the front group, the edge rushers plus the interior tackles, are the group that probably needs the most help. On the edge, they have four guys, Nelson, Tanner, Gunnarsson, Butler. That's not enough. They'd like 7. I don't know if they're going to get 3 in the portal, but they'd like more than they have. And the interior tackles, now again, the issue with the interior group is that they're young. It's Ty Robinson and young guys. If all those young guys were juniors and seniors and they were pretty good football players, we probably wouldn't be talking about the conversation the way we are now.
Right.
The problem is that outside of Ty Robinson, none of those interior guys are proven. They're just not. Colton Feast isn't proven because he got hurt last year. Mosai Newsome, Nash Hutmaker, Jalen Weaver, who am I forgetting? Raquan Buckley and Marquise Black.
Yep. No
No proven guys there. And so because those guys aren't proven, the logic says you got to go out and find a guy or two who have proven it. In Nebraska's case, that's Texas Tech's Devin Drew. That's a guy from Florida named, I think, Lamar Goods, and that is potentially an Alabama transfer by the name of Stephon Wynn. They're going to look at him as well. And they want him to look at Nebraska. And he transferred out, and he's got like 10 tackles over the last 2 years, but he was part of a pretty incredible rotation of players at Alabama and just wants a different vantage point. And so those are the two positions where you really look at it. I think it's going to be challenging for Nebraska to get everybody they want there, but if they get a couple of guys that they want, I think the thing that Nebraska can pitch is playing time, and they can pitch that Nebraska has good NIL. We'll talk more about NIL in a minute, but good, not great NIL, and they have great to elite academic and athletic support, and that stuff goes a ways too. So I think that's probably the area where you're talking about guys going in or coming to Nebraska. Those would be the names in the position I would focus on. Can they go get an offensive tackle? They can. What are you going to get of an offensive tackle who's currently in the portal? I don't know. You might be able to get a P5 cast-off, but you don't know what that looks like. What you really need when you go into the portal for an offensive lineman is a dude who's played. You're not going into the portal, in my opinion, you don't go into the portal for an offensive tackle who is no more experienced than all the other guys on your team. You go into the portal for an offensive lineman to get Kevin Williams or to get Hunter Anthony. And Hunter Anthony's right on the line in terms of experience. So you got to, I would almost say, go get a D2 or an FCS guy. And the funny thing is about offensive tackle, there are FCS and D2 guys that are better than the guys that are on Nebraska's roster right now. Like, that's how offensive line play works. It's not every 5-star, every 4-star, every high 3-star, and those guys are all good. No, it's a developmental thing, and there are guys at the D2 and the FCS level who will get picked this weekend in the NFL draft high because they're good at it. Because what you're looking for is technical proficiency and not what your recruiting rating was. So those are the positions I would point out first.
I would agree. I mean, the defensive line, the edge, that duo right there is obviously the biggest need, which is, and to Sam's point about known commodities, you want people who have proven to you that you can have done it before. I think that's why the Casey Rogers transfer was kind of a blow to Nebraska last week. I mean, Casey is not as experienced as some of the guys that they would be looking for in the portal, but he is a known commodity to the staff. He's been here for 4 years. They know that guy. They know what to expect out of him. They planned on playing him. And you look at some of the offers he's gotten since he's left, like, other teams think highly of him too. So I think I don't think we've said his name yet. I think it's worth mentioning that's a blow. I think they were going to go to the portal to get guys at this position regardless of Casey Rogers' status with the program, but that's a blow to the program. I think that you can never have too many wide receivers. That's the Brody Belt hype, as Sam wrote in his Monday Rewind I don't know, must have been a month ago now. That is a commentary on, and maybe not a commentary, but a message to everyone else in the wide receiver room. Hey, we don't care how fast you run, how tall you are, whatever. This guy who does all the things that we ask him to do, we're going to keep saying his name because he's doing what we ask him to do, and you guys need to follow suit there. So wouldn't rule out, especially if it becomes finalized that Xavier Betts is no longer with the program, wouldn't be surprised to see action there either.
I'll say on the Mathis front, I talked to his mom for probably 45 minutes a couple weeks ago about their story and kind of where he's coming from. His is interesting. It's interesting that Texas is the other finalist because he grew up, for the most part, in a suburb of Austin, Texas called Manor, and he was it was not lost on him that the hometown Longhorns were not interested in him the first time around. And so he's taken a couple visits to Texas. My understanding is that was in large part because of the fact that his former head coach at TCU, Gary Patterson, was there, not because of any affinity that he has for that particular program. So that, to me, is almost more what it comes down to for his decision is not Texas versus Nebraska, but almost, Gary Patterson versus what Nebraska can offer too. So I know, obviously Nebraska gave him the red carpet treatment for the spring game, and he put out like a 12-minute documentary sort of on his story, which is another unique
one thing that we can guarantee about what kind of impact the transfer portal will have on college football. It's going to get more ridiculous. We're going to have more promo videos, guys leaving, coming back, whatever. That stuff is going through the roof. Buy stock in ridiculous promo videos right now.
Well, it's one way to pay out the NIL money, do a documentary. Mm-hmm. And I didn't. I watched about 3 minutes of the 13-minute documentary because I was really just looking to see the part where he either announced what school he was picking or announced when he was going to pick that school.
Right at the very end.
Yeah, like, no offense. I'm sure his journey's good. And if he picks Nebraska, I'll probably watch it all the way full. You think he's going to go to Nebraska?
My hunch is yes. I think, for what it's worth, people in Texas think he's going there. They feel pretty strongly about that, too.
Wouldn't you have just already done that by now, though?
Maybe. I don't know why you wait another week unless you really don't know.
Wait for a spot.
I mean, yeah, I suppose. That's probably what it comes down to. And then the other one, Devin Drew, I mean, it sounds he has visited Illinois. That sounds like it's his other finalist at this point. And it's such a...
And they got a hell of a defensive coordinator there, too.
And it's such a weird thing to cover, right? Because it's not high school recruiting where you can talk to these guys and they list their finalists. It's all hush-hush. It's behind the scenes.
Yeah, he's a good player. Just for what it's worth, I watched 2 whole games, which you can do. Texas Tech has somebody who uploads to YouTube just the opposing offense against the Texas Tech defense. So I watched Houston and Texas. Now, Texas, incidentally, was the one where they scored 70, and Casey Thompson had a great game. Devin Drew's a good player. Yeah, he sets a good edge. Their defense is like Cosgrove 2007 against Missouri. They rush about 3 or 4 guys at most, and it's a soft zone. And so, like,
that's not a compliment.
Well, you're just not getting you're not getting the quarterback. Everything's in front of everybody. Like, it's Texas scored 70, but the way they did it, it was not the everybody was playing man coverage and they threw over it. It was swing passes to a running back who broke 3 tackles and ran for 50 yards. It was, little seam routes that went for 60 because Texas Tech guys couldn't tackle. I wasn't sure if I thought Texas Tech made the right decision in firing Matt Wells. And then I watched these games, and I saw that Texas Tech's like top 10 nationally in recruiting. Like, they made the right decision firing that guy. But Devin Drew, for what it's worth, I honestly, watching him on tape, he's a better player than Casey Rogers. Now, that's not me trying to put a silver lining around Casey Rogers' departure. I'm not trying, and Casey's a hard-working player, but Drew's got some ability. I should say this: he's a better player on film than what Casey Rogers has consistently shown at Nebraska. Now, maybe Rogers has got an upside that we're not aware of. That's why he's getting USC, Auburn. He plays really hard, so Rogers is an unbelievably hard-working player. So he's bound to get some good looks, but we'll see. Drew, I think's got real potential. He's a little undersized, and Rogers is bigger. So Rogers is 6'4", 300. Drew's probably 6'2.5", 280. But I think that guy would be a good addition to Nebraska. I really do. I think he would be a DeAndre Thomas style player, and probably a better pass rusher than his numbers suggest because Texas Tech's defense is not like Nebraska's. Nebraska's defense will bring some pressure, and it will give him some opportunities to get to the quarterback.
So like we alluded to, if you're bringing in guys, other scholarship players then have to leave the program for that to happen. And again, that has to happen by Saturday, by May 1st. You have to be in that portal if you don't want to sit out a season, if you want to be eligible. So like, where do you guys see maybe some movement potential within the program to make room for some of these other guys we're talking about?
I could see a medical retirement somewhere in there. Somebody saying, I'm done with my career. Tate Wilden already did that. I assume he's on a medical scholarship and will continue to remain at Nebraska. I could see another one of those. I do think there's some players who've been through a lot at Nebraska physically and may just be ready to not do it anymore. Running backs natural. They have 5 scholarship running backs. They have 2 freshmen who are incoming. One of whom I think is going to be, in the mix right away. And in the secondary, that's just natural that you would expect some attrition there. I don't think they want to lose a lot back there, but maybe one, at corner. I think Nebraska feels like they came in and they got a corner in Tommy Hill that's going to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think Javier Morton is an option at corner. And then I think in the long run, Marquise Buford at corner, a physical, inside your pads corner who can tackle and run and get in the body of receivers, is a more palatable option than Marquise Buford in space. I think Marquise Buford can be a very good corner. I think he'd be a good safety. I think he'd be a very good corner. So Buford moves down there. I think you've got your corners, and then at safety you hope Deshaun Singleton is what he shows to be on film. Singleton's a guy that needs to move up really fast. Like, he has the ability. He's tall, he's long, he can run. Travis Fisher will move him into some opportunities where he can play very early, I would think. So we'll see what they do there. And Scott Frost on the show last night was pretty clear that Miles Farmer and Quentin Newsome are starters. He was like, Miles Farmer and Quentin Newsome need to take that room over. So they feel really good about Farmer, and they feel good about Newsome. Tommy Hill's going to be the other corner. And then the question is, do you move Marquise Buford to a position where he can play corner and he can cover for you, or do you keep him at safety until Deshaun Singleton comes along, or Noah Poole-Gates or whatever? And Noah Poole-Gates could move down, right? In theory, he could move down. He could move. He could move to a spot.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of talent back there. They've just got to figure out where all the pieces fit. So defensive back and running back are the two. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of playable, talented players along the offensive line, and there's only 5 slots. Guys are going to be in a hurry to get their, they all have NFL dreams, get their tape together. So that's a spot where you could see someone, if it's an overcrowded situation, people could leave. I think to Sam's point, the defensive backs, Travis Fisher has a tricky job because it seems like every time you ask him who's doing well, he names everybody. But if you're going to name everybody when you're asked who's doing well, it might confuse those guys when the depth chart comes out and they're not very, very high on it. Like Sam just went through half the cornerback defensive chart or depth chart. And do you know who he did not mention? It's Braxton Clark, who's been here for a while now.
Right. I think he'll stick around.
Okay. Has great size. But if he does, if you're Braxton Clark, or a person like Braxton Clark is just player X in this situation. Sure. And you've been here for a while and you're running out of eligibility and you think you can be a pro, you just need an opportunity.
Right.
Like eventually you have to make a decision that's best for yourself.
Braxton comes from a state where there's a lot of schools. So one thing that I always look at too is, where does a kid come from? And not because of he comes from that state and they transfer. No, he comes from a state where if he wanted to go to a school, there's 7 schools in Florida. By the way, more than half of them are probably better than Nebraska at this point that he could transfer to. Like FAU, FIU, Central Florida, South Florida, Jacksonville, which is I think D2, but they may be FCS now. Up in, the Jacksonville U, FSU, Miami, Florida.
Keep going.
Florida A&M, Bethune-Cookman. There's lots of good schools down there, lots of good football programs that you can kind of go to. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's an opportunity when a kid comes from Texas is another one. There's a lot of schools down there. SMU, Rice, all these schools that will take good football players.
And who, by the way, have probably, if you end up at a Power 5 school, have probably already contacted you during the recruiting process.
Oh, yeah. And I'm just saying that, Braxton Clark, or not him, but a player from Florida could go and say, I'm going to get in the portal, just like Jaden Francois. I think Francois ended up at Florida. FIU or Central. He was Central Florida.
Okay.
Henry Gray was FIU. One of them was FAU. These are all good schools.
Right.
You know, like these are players. What I mean by that is these are all programs that can produce NFL players. And sometimes what you need to get to the NFL is 4 years of starting. So that's part of it. But, you know, one of the question marks, just watch the medical thing. I think there could be a couple guys that are like, oh, man, you know, and they're just ready to hang it up. So they don't become transfers. Maybe they do transfer, but, you know, initially it's like, I'm going to walk away from the game for a while.
So the portal has been a lot of the news. It hasn't been all the news. We heard from Scott Frost. He was on the Husker Radio Network earlier this week, really the first time that he's spoken out since the end of the spring game. There wasn't. I didn't think there was a ton of interesting content from that hour. He mentioned how Thomas Fidone was
not great,
nicked up, so there was no further clarity there. You mentioned, Sam, about his comments on Quentin Newsome and Miles Farmer being part of the secondary that in theory is maybe more talented than last year's team, but doesn't have yet that established veteran leadership. I guess what else, you guys listened to the interview too, what else kind of stood out from what he said?
I think it was interesting what he said about this is akin to what they've been saying since he's been here. It seems like that they're so close. Like they don't need to make major overhauls. He said they need to make tweaks. It's like, well, buddy, you did fire your entire offensive staff. Are we calling that a tweak? I don't know that I would call that a tweak. I think that's a pretty significant change. Maybe, you know, as they've said, maybe what they're doing isn't that different, but they are. When you change your staff that way, I think that's a major change. So that was interesting to me. We were talking a little bit about this before the show. The way he talks about the quarterbacks, I don't understand why why it's a state secret to tell us how the quarterbacks are looking.
Yeah,
I just like if you want to, you can try to read into it as maybe he's not thrilled about the quarterbacks. That's why he's not. I just think that this is football has always been this way, where everything is an advantage. You know, last year when they didn't release a depth chart, and you know we can't let them know who we might play. It's like Casey Thompson. Like there is film of Casey Thompson playing at Texas. People know who Casey Thompson is. They know what he can or can't do. Northwestern is watching a bunch of Casey Thompson Texas film right now. He's not going to be. They're not going to be like, who's that guy when he comes out to play them in Ireland in August. It's not going to happen. So that stuff is just. I don't think that it's notable, but it's just annoying to me. Like. Just say you don't want to talk about him then. If that's going to be what you say. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know exactly. You know, I think the quarterback thing is still a work in progress. What we saw in the spring game, if you watch a lot of Casey Thompson tape, I think the things that are very true about Casey is when he knows where to go with the ball and he knows where he wants to throw the football, he's pretty darn good. Like you can go back and watch the games that, you know, I watched Devin Drew from last year. You know, and watching Casey Thompson in that game, you don't talk about a beautiful, you know, corner ball, fade ball to the short corner, the front corner, beautifully thrown. You know, when he knows he's got a zone defense, he can throw it in between the triangle of defenders to a guy. He's pretty good with swing passes. He does a pretty good job of stepping up in the pocket and firing hard, you know, in certain spots. When he doesn't know where to go with the ball, it does look a little bit different. The picture is different, and he tries to force, and there are some interception opportunities. And when you watch him throw, you know, you can just tell that a lot of energy and velocity and effort is put into the work that he does. With Chubba Purdy, there's a little less energy. Like it's just a little bit more natural. None of them look like Dylan Raiola, but you know, like I just think they want to have more time to see everything. You know, through a vantage point. Now, the flip side of the coin is I feel like, you know, there's an opportunity to give a guy the team and say, this is your team, and get the offense used to him being the leader and learn how to deal with him as the leader in both his strengths and his weaknesses. Like, sometimes it's hard to get used to somebody, even with their weaknesses. Like, it's hard to get used to it when you don't know until the last week who the leader's going to be. Like, does that make sense? Like, instead of giving Casey Thompson an opportunity to build that relationship with guys all summer long, like, you must feel very strongly about He hasn't really won the job, and I wouldn't want him to be complacent. Why would Casey Thompson be complacent? I don't know. I don't think he would be. But you must feel very strongly about that to not just say it now. Either because you think someone's going to leave, or you think that like that wouldn't be good for the team, because I would think it would be great for the team to know who it is so that they could get used to it. And even if all of his teammates don't like him, and I'm not saying that that's the case, but even if they don't, they'd learn to get used to it. When you drag the competition out to, we're going to name the quarterback and then we're getting on the plane to Ireland, you don't acclimate your players to that. The other question that in theory could be in play is maybe they don't know if Casey Thompson is the guy yet because they're not quite sure if he's the leader that they want.
Well,
what if that's the case? What if it's like, well, what about Chubba Purdy? What if what the coaches have seen tells them we think we might have a guy here who might run this thing better than Casey would?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that they had an incomplete spring evaluation because Purdy was out with the foot injury and you didn't have a chance to see what he could do. And what we did see in the spring game, such as it was, I thought was pretty impressive, and he was happy with what it was. And Casey Thompson, his personality has been extremely, you don't want to call it OCD, but he's very dialed in to his craft, all the details, like so much so to the point that like the effort for him is not dialing into the craft, it's sort of backing off and allowing other people into that space and being that leader. So it does seem like, that leadership aspect for Casey Thompson, I think would benefit him in Nebraska to be able to start with that now and move forward.
And what I'm saying is pure speculation, but let's be clear. When you give that vague of an answer about the quarterbacks and like you're not able to talk, you don't want to talk for 5 minutes about all those guys, the natural inclination of that is people wonder what's going on. And that's the piece where like what you would like to say to a coach, in this case him, is like, do you understand that the answer that you give, perhaps designed to be cryptic for some reason, actually gives people the impression that things aren't very good in that room? Because you can give that impression off. Like, if you can't give a specific answer about that room, to me, that's like, well, what is going on there? Is something wrong? Like, is there... Can you... It does, and it does. It feels like it's been so vague. Like, not since 2019, when Scott Frost felt great about Adrian Martinez, have we had this, like, confidence around the quarterback. And Whipple's got a little of it, but I just don't... I have a hard time understanding why it's hard for them to be positive about it.
Well, maybe he feels burned by the Adrian Martinez experience. He kind of puffed his chest out about Adrian at the beginning of the Adrian Martinez experience.
Sure.
And a lot of that fell flat. Adrian Martinez didn't produce at Nebraska what I'm sure 2019 Scott Frost thought he would eventually produce one day. So that could be part of it. Right. I think something you hit on at the end of that's really important is that Mark Whipple is not acting this way. On the very first day of spring football availability, he said, yeah, Casey Thompson took the first snap. I think he's the best one right now. And I think that's more where they're at. I think Scott, for whatever reason, is, like you're saying, being unnecessarily cryptic because that's what football coaches do. And I think Whipple, I don't know, every time I heard Mark Whipple talk, I got the vibe that Casey Thompson was the starter. And I think the players can pick up on that too. I think it's weird that the dichotomy exists, that your offensive coordinator is over here saying one thing, kind of freewheeling. Yeah, Casey feels like the guy. And Scott Frost is like, hey, you never know. You can never know. Let me shuffle the hats in front of you. Which one is going to be our starting quarterback? Yeah. It's certainly weird that dynamic exists, but I don't know that the team is confused about who quarterback one is right now. I don't feel that way.
Let me be clear about like what I'm kind of talking about as it relates to coaches. When you sit down and talk with Fred Hoiberg, when Fred Hoiberg talks about a player, first he's going to tell you the three things that the guy's phenomenal at, and he uses the word literally, phenomenal. So every time Fred will give you a scouting report, and he's going to give he's phenomenal at this, he's this, he's this, he's this. Doesn't linger too much on the negatives.
You're probably going to have to prod Fred a little bit.
Yeah, you got to prod for that. But Fred has an upfront, like, here's what he's good at. Will Bolt seems pretty honest both ways. Like, he'll tell you when it's good, he'll tell you when it's not.
Yes.
But there's a specificity there. You know, when with Bo Pelini, there wasn't a lot of specifics because Bo was an irritable person. He was just sort of a irritable, contrarian human being. But if Bo said the words, he's a good football player, you knew actually what he meant is he's a great football player. So like he would say Levante David, he's a good football player. What you know when he says that is you know what he means. With Scott, like the things that are a tell from when he feels good about a guy is the way he described Tommy Hill. He's like, Tommy's a lot of fun. He's a competitor. Like you can tell what Scott wants in a football player based on the way that he compliments them. And he compliments Tommy Hill in a way that indicates this is the kind of guy I'd love to have about 27 of these guys. You can kind of just get that vibe from him. And you get the same vibe when he talks about Trey Palmer. What's interesting to me about Frost is, like, I know that he wants to restore the walk-on program and recruit kids in state, but Scott wants to be around guys that got big personalities and talk a game and then show it and, like, prove it. His Central Florida team was full of players like that, and so were Oregon's players. He wants guys that, like, have a little bit of swagger and some confidence to them, talk a little bit, back it up, play big-time football. And I don't know if it's that Casey Thompson is very political, like he's a very thoughtful, nice guy who says all the right things. You can tell Chubba Purdy's got a little bit of I don't know if arrogance is the right word, but there's a little air there. You can tell he's got a little bit of a swagger. And it's like internal. Logan, I think, has always been real humble and quiet and all those other things. So I don't know. Like I'm curious because I think at the end of the day, Scott's going to be the one who makes a part of that decision. Whipple will too. And I think they're going to go with the guy that they think, is got the personality to take this team home. And I'm not sure, Martinez did. He was a great guy and a pretty good quarterback. But I think it could be hard for Adrian to get on guys and to just have a natural swagger about him.
And he was the guy, too, if you remember 2 years ago, Martinez, who coaches came out and said, yeah, there probably was a little complacency there. So I think that plays into it a little bit, too.
And that burned him. I know Frost was frustrated with that. Like, how could you go after that first year and come into this season and feel comfortable? I think that frustrated Frost, and it should have.
But if it's not Casey Thompson, if Chubba Purdy or somebody overtakes him, while that would be great for that individual, man, I don't know what that says about the process in restructuring that room. I can't imagine that would be a good thing for Nebraska if it's not Thompson at this point.
And oh, by the way, here's all this NIL money that Casey Thompson was out there flashing on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, and we're gonna give him all that money to just sit behind Chubba Purdy. Nice.
No, I to be clear, I think it's going to be Casey when you watch him play, and I think he is a good leader and all the rest. I think it's going to be him. I'm just talking about the dynamics that surround those discussions and the way that try to put yourself in his shoes. Why would he talk like that? Is it just because he's kind of irritable and contrarian like Bo, or is because when he talks about Miles Farmer and Quentin Newsom, it doesn't sound like that? And literally, Bo could talk about anyone. Amir Abdullah, good football player. Like he just didn't.
Could it be because
he didn't like to praise people?
I think it's his former quarterback history too. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
He was burned in that way, because I can't think of another position where he doesn't, or he kind of tightens up like that.
Yeah,
I think
that's a great point.
Position. I think it's got to be.
I was just going to say that.
And he's talked about it before. I mean, we've post games before. He's gone back and talked about his experience in the '90s and anointing somebody too soon and the pressure that comes with that. I think there's still a real sensitivity to what that's like in this particular program.
The challenge that Scott had when he was a quarterback at Nebraska is there wasn't any question that he was the best quarterback on the roster. None. Even Tommy Frazier, who is the best quarterback in school history, had to beat Brooke Behringer out in '95. And it was a no-joke competition that Tommy barely won. When Scott took over in '96, there was no one else. He was by far and away the best player. Frankie London, forget about it. He wasn't. Matt Turman, no. And Matt's a great player. But Matt Turman was the backup in '96, and that wasn't, so no. So I think Scott had to handle it in a way where, Scott didn't have the opportunity to compete against Brooke Behringer for the starting job. If he had, it may have been different. In 97, no one questioned whether Scott was better than Frankie London, even for the one drive Frankie London came in. So Scott had to deal with a little bit different responsibility than Tommy. Tommy had to win the job when he was a freshman, which he did midway through the season, and he had to win the job again going into his senior year. He had to win the job twice to get the job. Scott had to win the job, but he had to beat Matt Turman and Frankie London. Well, that's a little bit different than beating out a fifth-year senior in Mike Grant, which is what Tommy did in 92, and then beating out folk hero Brooke Behringer, which is what Tommy did in 95. Mm-hmm. And so I can understand why Frost is sensitive to that, because he knew, and everyone else knew, that he was by far and away the best quarterback on the roster, and yet people took shots at him, including some people who worked for the World-Herald.
It's also to further highlight the difference between Whipple and Frost, that the moment you guys are talking about where Frost was overexposed as a player here, not relatively speaking that far away. He's a very young coach still in the industry. Mark Whipple has kind of seen it all, done it all. When you get comfortable, when you get older, you kind of get a little bit of a screw it about you. Mark Whipple does press conferences in his socks.
Right.
I don't know that he would do that if he was 45 and still trying to make a name for himself in the coaching industry. I think that's part of this too. So
Great
Scott,
point.
I think that's part of the state's secret stuff in Scott is like, he's just always hyper aware of the possibility that, if I give this little nugget out, it could be taken advantage of.
Scott Frost did mention that he went to McCook to have an NIL conversation, and then he was asked briefly about NIL, and there was a conversation in there about, this is the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
You've done reporting on NIL through the ABM story. I've talked to 5 or 6 people for a story that we're going to run in the World-Herald on Sunday. And it's a really interesting moment because there's so many different narratives out there, and it's hard to know what to believe, how the deals are structured. But I don't think there's going to be NCAA regulation over the summer. I think we're going to have 1 year, at least, where it's just, all hell breaking loose.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what's going to happen. The money could get astronomical very, very quickly.
What have you, in your reporting, give us a taste of some of the stuff that you've seen?
Okay. The numbers that have been thrown around about the $10 million or the $15 million per year have some teeth to them because there's people who would know. And they know because they process the transactions. They have record of it. So that's not necessarily a fairy tale number at some schools. The other thing that is true is that multiple NILs are going to pop up, or multiple collectives are going to pop up at every school. There are then secondary deals with not nickel and dime, but smaller amounts that go to athletes for this, that, or the other. There are appearance fees we don't know much about. There are autograph sessions that are not run really by collectives, but are run by autograph companies, and they go and get paid. There's so many different avenues by which players can get paid, 10, 15 different ways, that money piles up very quickly. 2 things are true. One, it's hard for a player to say no, because just like us, how often do we say no to money? But also that takes away from what they're doing and just in their lives. And when you have a market that is this deregulated, and this market is really deregulated, it is inevitable that the market is going to begin to take advantage of the athletes, either through deals that are what you would call less than fair to the student athletes, or in the case of LifeWallet, which just signed Nigel Pack to a 2-year, $800,000 deal, the purpose of the deal isn't really Nigel Pack. It's LifeWallet. LifeWallet is the story here. The player is the player. But LifeWallet wanted everybody to know what they were paying the player because LifeWallet wants to make money off of signing the player. I don't know that Nigel Pack will ever be used in a single advertisement. The point of signing Nigel Pack to that deal is LifeWallet saying they are a player. Be a part of LifeWallet, Miami fans, because we are a part of Miami. It's become very quickly less about the name, image, and likeness of the student athlete, and much more about the name, image, and likeness of the brand that wants to buy the student athlete. And that story could reverse. That's one of the challenges. The other thing that's really interesting with Nebraska is, and this is not quite only Nebraska, but this is the way it is in Nebraska, there are a number of media outlets that are cashing in on NIL because Nebraska brought its multimedia operation in-house. They can't have anybody on those shows for NIL purposes. They can't. They made that decision to bring it in-house at the exact same time NIL started, and in doing that, they basically pushed the athletes to other media organizations. Now, one of those is arranged through the Collective, but another one is a radio station, and the owner there just signed the athletes up to come in and do shows, and then they get a little bit of money, they get gift cards. You know, it sets up that way, but he's got 32 athletes on his radio station.
Real quick, do you think the Kobe Webster accountability conversation happens on an in-house radio network? I don't think so.
No,
chance.
No, I don't. And to be clear, I've listened to enough to these radio shows now on 93.7 to know that conversation is not being replicated across 32 athletes.
No.
Kobe is an academic All-American who was not, in my opinion, duped into anything there. That was purposeful.
I don't think so either.
Kobe's going to be a coach one day, and Kobe had something to say. So most of these athletes who go in there are just talking about how they're growing up lives or their cats. Like, the shows are not Kobe's was kind of a one-off because Kobe is a unique person.
Regardless, not happening if it's on the Husker sponsored
there
radio
wouldn't have been
station. Not
somebody
happening.
who asked him, well, what do you think your coach? Like, it wouldn't have happened. Oftentimes in that operation they veer up to a line and somebody says something interesting and it's like, well, I'm not going to follow up on that. Like, if you wanted to have Scott Frost talk about NIL for 15 minutes, you don't think you could plug him for 15 minutes? You could. You could go on and on and on, and you'd get a Dabo answer eventually.
He was asked last summer on the tours that they took, and he was very insightful about it in ways that you can't be in a buttoned-up interview, no doubt.
Now, if it were me, like, I wouldn't go position by position and, like, tell me about your inside linebackers. Not much has changed since the spring game. We all kind of saw it. But he wanted to do it that way. That's fine. But the point is that there's 32 people on this radio show, on this radio station. And one of the points the radio station owner, is a good guy, made to me is, well, these athletes aren't showing up on the in-house network for any reason. And he's right. Because some of those athletes are baseball players, gymnasts. Bryce Matthews and Cam Chick have a show. Well, Bryce Matthews and Cam Chick weren't showing up on Sports Nightly.
No.
They weren't. Might have been on there one time. Now they have a show every week, and they're paid for it. And these athletes now have a chance to say what they want to say versus waiting for the in-house network to call them up in between the opinions of the host. And I'm not knocking the opinions of the host because I'm that person too. But the radio station owner made a really good point in saying this is the first time that a lot of these athletes have ever even had this. Because a lot of us don't even interview the gymnast. We don't.
Right.
So it's a market. It's a new thing. And whether or not it makes the radio station any money, I don't really know. It's not really my business. But the point is, it's a platform for the athletes, and they make a little money.
The other part that's interesting to me, too, is you talk about money. I mean, that's where the power is. And when we're talking even about portal recruiting and high school recruiting, like, this is not the coaching staff going to these players with monetary figures. This is not the athletic director or Nebraska officials. The purse strings are being held by collectives and individuals outside of the purview of the athletic department. And maybe they work together, but they don't work for each other, and there's no accountability there. And so
they don't have to work together.
They don't. So who really do you want to be in this kind of power dynamic? I think I'd want to be the guy who's got the purse strings, right? Like, that's where the power is. And because of, in this case with Nebraska's in-house media rights, but in a larger sense, the fact that schools cannot have oversight over their own NIL workings, it's shifting the power dynamic in really fascinating ways, where some of your biggest movers and shakers now are no longer within the athletic department of the football program.
I also think, just to your point about portal recruiting, I think that we are it's a unique position to be in because O'Shawn Mathis, for example, who's a good football player, is in it because a team like Nebraska has such a dire need at that position they are incentivized to mobilize the NIL troops in a way that they wouldn't for an average recruit. Basically, like I could envision a world where O'Shawn Mathis is getting like, quarterback recruit money somewhere because that team just really needs a pass rusher at that time. I think
Right.
that dynamic is interesting as well.
Moving on.
Yes, we can move on. One other topic I thought we need to hit today is the NFL draft, which is coming up here this weekend, and it should be a busier draft for Nebraska purposes than we've had in since 2016. Maybe you got to go back a few years. Certainly, Nebraska with I don't know, depending on where you look, projection wise, 3 to 5 guys maybe who could be taken. They've got 9 guys overall who went through the pro day process and are going to be out there. I'm curious from you guys, first of all, how many Huskers do you think get drafted this year, and who do you think gets taken first?
Well, let's count them: Cam Jurgens, Cam Taylor-Britt, Austin Allen, JoJo Doman,
Damian Daniels.
Yeah,
Samori Toure.
I'm thinking. I'll say 4. The 4 guys I just named. I think Cam gets drafted. Cam's definitely getting drafted. Both Cams are getting drafted. Austin Allen, I think, I'm pretty confident will get drafted later rounds, and JoJo, I think, will get drafted as well. And I think you'll see Samori Toure, Deontay Williams, maybe Markel Dismuke get picked up as undrafted free agents. But I was talking to Sam yesterday. He said that not a big chance, but he was saying, the Cam Jurgens outside chance. Cam Jurgens could slip into the first round.
Yeah.
That threw me for a loop.
I don't think he will. I don't. To be clear, Tyler Linderbaum is the #1 center.
Yeah.
But let's be clear about something else. This is not a great draft.
Oh, yeah. That's
It's
true,
not.
too.
It's not a quarterback-heavy draft. There's no reason to take a quarterback in the first round. I expect 3 of them to be taken, but none of these guys would be even second-round picks if it were a couple years ago or last year. It's not a great draft for running backs. I don't know if there'll be a first-rounder taken. It's not a great draft for pass rushers. Aiden Hutchinson is a fine player. He's about the 10th to 12th best pass rusher in the last 3 or 4 years. In terms of like guys that have come out. We watched Aiden when he was here playing Nebraska.
I forget who it was, but there was a Nebraska player leading up to that game that said, yeah, he's kind of poo-pooed him a little bit. It was an offensive lineman who said, yeah, we're not changing on what we do.
He plays really hard.
Yeah.
He's not, I would not describe him as, I don't know, a Bosa. I just wouldn't. And so, it's not a strong draft. And what if somebody says, you know what, it's not a strong draft. We're going to take the best center in the last 5 years with the 18th pick. Why not? Well, then all of a sudden Cam Jurgens is interesting. It kind of depends on where Linderbaum goes. If Linderbaum goes at 28, well, then Cam's going to be 50 or whatever. If Linderbaum all of a sudden goes at 18 or 19, then some other team in the back end of the draft's like, shoot. First round, it's like, oh my God. Well, we better get our guy, and he's clearly he's likely the #2. So the name that I would throw in there is Ben Stilley. I think Ben Stilley had a sneaky good last year, and he's actually been a better football player than we've given him credit for. He's a quiet guy, so we don't spend a lot of time thinking about Ben because
it's not a glamorous position either.
Yeah, and he just wasn't a boisterous, like if he had Garrett Nelson's personality, I think we would think more of him being drafted. And that's not to knock Garrett or Ben.
Right.
But I think Ben Stilley could play in the NFL for a long time. I think he's tough, and I think he's physical and smart. And, again, played pretty good football last year. People didn't maybe notice that as much. I didn't notice it as much, but he's got an outside shot. I think we're going to come to the end of the draft, and we're going to say Damian Daniels should have returned because I don't think he's going to get drafted. Samori Toure, maybe. I have a hard time believing he's better than Stanley Morgan. I don't think he is. We'll see what happens there. Dismuke and Williams are probably going to be free agents. What does that leave us?
Did you say Austin Allen?
Yeah, he'll get drafted.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he'll get drafted somewhere in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. Jurgens, second round.
You think Jurgen goes off the board first among Huskers?
I do. Taylor-Britt, second round. Probably to a team that wants to play aggressive coverage. The one thing I don't think you want with Cam is playing an off coverage where he's having to come down and make tackles and transition back down. I think you want him to be out on the island and fighting with an elite receiver, running stride for stride. And then JoJo, I don't know what happens with JoJo. I think he's going to get drafted, but I don't know exactly where he's going to go, and I don't know what they're going to ask him to do. We'll see. It's rare for somebody to get the just kind of run around and make plays job in the defense if you're not Isaiah Simmons.
Right.
And JoJo's a great player. He's not Isaiah Simmons athletic, and he's not who's another guy that does this?
Derwin James.
Yeah, him. He's another one that's much like this. I don't know that JoJo can be that player because
both those guys were like top 15 picks.
They were.
Yeah.
And and they're unique. So those are two that you would that ideally JoJo would do that, but I just don't know if that's a role for him.
Yeah.
I see him going somewhere north. AFC North, NFC North, Packers, Bengals. I think the Bengals are going to be a Nebraska school because Zach's there. I think you're going to see them pick a guy from Nebraska. I think Tampa, because Licht's there, is going to look at Nebraska guys more closely. I think the Packers are going to be a franchise that looks at Nebraska guys. So I think you're going to. Those are some NFL teams I think to think about. Steelers. I could see JoJo Joman being a Steeler. Tomlin's got a relationship, so yeah.
You guys broke it down pretty well. I think 4 also. I think Cam Taylor-Britt has a chance to go first just because he's the guy who does something really well that's the most established.
Yeah.
Like Juergens strikes me as a guy who has really rocketed up because of his freakish athletic ability and all the testing and the combines. And the beef jerky stuff probably helps with the exposure a little bit too. Doman does so many things well. He's going to land somewhere. He's going to be at the worst a special teams player for somebody for a long time. But Taylor-Britt, we saw what he did against guys like David Bell and some of the top receivers in the Big Ten. He held his own against guys that are going to be in the NFL.
And the testing numbers, too. He's got the combination.
Right. And he has the personality, the drive. I think he was in the Senior Bowl and played after a day after he got his tooth knocked out and came back. Teams love that kind of stuff, too. So I think he feels like that total package kind of guy. So I'll go out on maybe a small limb and say he's the first guy to get taken. Let's kind of hit some lightning round stuff. Different things that are going on in some of the other sports. Maybe start with hoops. What's been going on there, Jimmy? They've added
since we've been recording. Antonio Reeves listed Nebraska in his final 5, so that's good news for them. They like him. It's Nebraska, Xavier, Kentucky, Oregon, and DePaul. DePaul, Chicago school. It's where he's from.
You're not going to play at DePaul.
I don't think so either. I don't think so either, but you never know.
We're talking about an underachieving program. My Lord.
I don't think so either, but I do think Nebraska has the biggest role to offer outside of maybe Xavier and of that crew. So I think that gives them an advantage.
DePaul returning that score they've got? Because they got a guy that averages 20 a game. They're terrible.
Couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Couldn't tell you. But I think they've got a decent chance at landing him, although they were also connected to this Texas transfer Courtney Ramey yesterday, 6'3" guard, which would, that seems like a contingency plan to me. Unless they think someone else is leaving, then they might want to, I don't know. That could be, so that's something to keep an eye on. Could be Casey. Who knows?
He's got to get in by this week.
Yeah,
right.
He does.
How about Juwan Gary?
Juwan Gary is here. We know about Juwan Gary. He is
what does he
somewhere
do?
between. I'm trying to figure out is he replacing Trey McGowan's or Lat Mayen? Kind of like a sandwich of both. Size wise, he's a little bit bigger than Trey, closer to the Lat size, 6'6", but has a lot of the trade defensive qualities. Guards well. He can guard up. He was guarding 4s at Alabama. Watched him guard Jabari Smith, who might be the number 1 pick in the draft in a couple months, and did a pretty decent job against Auburn.
Yeah.
But they also has quick enough feet to switch. They didn't do a ton of switching at Alabama, but he can do it. He's quick enough on his feet to do that. The concern for me with him is offense is hard to find a fit for him because he can't shoot.
No.
And he did a good job at Alabama. Teams played off him quite a bit. They were basically in default help position off of him all the time. But he did a good job of taking advantage of turned heads and making good, smart backdoor cuts and getting after it on the offensive glass. I think he was like 1.7 offensive rebounds per game, which in 15 minutes per game is pretty freaking good.
Yeah.
So that's something helpful that he can bring to them. I just wonder, I know that he's going to be a contributor. I would say that he would be a big-time minutes contributor confidently if he had a better jump shot. And there is some hope there. His high school scouting reports projected him as having the potential to become a decent three-point shooter. Bottom line is he's 10 for 50 on threes in his college career. He's a 58% free throw shooter, which like sometimes to look for a silver lining, coaches will say, well, the free throw shooting is actually more predictive. And that's true sometimes. But he's not shooting free throws well either. And so, shrug. I think he can help. He can be a defensive force. He's a good culture guy. He's the kind of guy that talks Travis Fisher language. He says, I'm a dog. He told me I'm a walking nightmare. That's what he told Nebraska fans they should expect. So that's good. They need more of that. But offensively, it's a tricky fit. I think we should also mention that Baylor Shireman put his name in the transfer portal yesterday. It's tricky because he's still in the NBA draft, and it sounds like that his plan is still to stay in the NBA draft. It also, since we have been recording, Kyle Tucker, who covers Kentucky for The Athletics, said that they are going hard after him, and
that's good for them.
Yeah, but not just
Nebraska wants him, and he's going to go to Nebraska.
I don't know about that. I would not know, because I think the
Nebraska
appeal,
can't afford to miss that.
I'm not. I think that they should, and I think they should. I think they would throw as many resources as they possibly could at trying to bring Baylor Shireman here. I don't think that it necessarily matters when Kentucky, and I was reading the Tucker story while we were recording this, and it's basically everyone wants him. Yeah. Like everyone wants him. Not only everyone wants him, I think everyone would find a featured role for him. Maybe not hand him the keys in the way that I think Nebraska would, but if you want to win, which is a huge part, I think, of the NBA draft evaluation process, you can go somewhere else. But not only Kansas. You can go to Kansas, sure, but like
you don't have to go to Kentucky.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Kentucky is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. That's just weird. Like Kyle Tucker covers Kentucky for The Athletic.
Well, they want it,
but they do want him. So does everyone else. Yeah. That's the point. Like there are others, like UCLA, Duke, Michigan State. All these other schools want him too. And I think it's not like with Antonio Reeves. Like if Antonio Reeves goes to Kentucky, the role that Antonio Reeves would have at Kentucky and the role that he would have in Nebraska are very different.
Right.
The role that Baylor Shireman might have at both those schools, less different. And I think that makes a huge difference. Maybe.
I don't know that.
Creighton, by the way, Creighton should also be throwing a bunch of resources at trying to get him.
I agree with that, but what's interesting about Creighton is you look at Creighton's roster and you look at a roster that has all the pieces. They got the point guard. They got the NBA guy in Kaluma who he's going to skyrocket.
Sure. Trey
Alexander, Ryan Kalkbrenner. Baylor can be added to that, but
he could be a much better version of Alex O'Connell. He shoots like 47% from three, which is much better. O'Connell was more of a reputational shooter, really, than he was an actual production shooter. Pretty much his entire college career.
Alex could also dunk the ball
for sure. But
he could run.
He could, and he could defend better than he was given credit for too.
People watched SDSU, watched the half-court offense where Baylor got the ball at the top, and
he's a great cutter. But Baylor Shireman,
Nebraska should get him.
Baylor Shireman, if you put him in that's just an element of shot creation that I think really helps Creighton, and a lethal shooter, and a good rebounder too. He does everything, man.
And Creighton should go after him. All I'd say is that Creighton actually has a lot of the pieces.
For sure.
They don't. The chemistry, and you covered them. The chemistry that Creighton had at the end of the year, without Nembhard, was great.
Mm-hmm.
Like they figured it out. Like Trey Alexander and Arthur Kaluma being where they were, they figured it out. Boy, you don't want to mess with that too much because you know what you got, and you can't unchange what Kaluma became. Kaluma can now become the featured player. He can average 18 and 8 because he hit all those threes.
But if you meet,
you know what I'm saying?
For sure.
But there's no reason to go back.
If you meet with Baylor Shireman, and I have no reason to believe that he would be a chemistry mucker.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't have any reason to believe that. But that's the kind of piece that can take you from, hey, we're a top 14, 15
Sure.
preseason team. Like, now we're near the top.
Yeah.
Now we're a team that can really contend for something
That's fair.
that, like, to be honest, I don't think anyone really, even though this Creighton team, like, they have so much positive energy around them right now, I don't think anyone really thinks that they are in, like, the conversation.
We'll see. As it relates to Nebraska's, they have to want. I mean, they got to get the guy.
It's not
Kids
a
from
question of
Aurora.
wanting him. You have to go get him. If that guy, if he leaves the NBA draft, you have to go get him.
I mean,
Particularly in the situation there are now, where wins have to come fast.
That's
a must get.
And
have to try and
they
go
did
get
a
him.
hell of a job of getting Griesel right away. So like Fred's a smart guy. He knows.
But again,
we
if
had
you
talked about this a month ago. Of course, if
Yeah.
we had talked about it, the lemon brains that we are, they obviously had talked
But
about
if
it.
they-
So they knew.
But if they're competing with, like, if the role is give or take the same thing, how are you choosing, like, unless he has a very, 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 very strong, like a Sam Griesel-esque connection to the program, you're not choosing Nebraska over Michigan State, Duke, whatever.
Well, what I would say is this, and it's to play 1 year at Nebraska and to be able to have done that, Austin Allen's not going to buy a drink in Lincoln ever again. Now, granted, did Austin Allen win games? He did not. But he's going to get drafted, and he's going to be, for as long as he ever wants to be, every coaching door in this state will open for him when he wants to be a high school coach, and Austin will probably be a high school coach, probably a college coach. That's part of why you do it. You go and play 1 year at Kentucky, nobody's going to remember who you are. They just won't. Unless you make the game-winning shot to win the national championship.
The GMs might.
They might. Well, I get that, but like,
I think that's what
the reason that the Midwest is the Midwest is because it's the Midwest. Like, that stuff matters, and there's one other school other than Creighton and Nebraska where they will remember everything about you, and that's Kansas. Now, if you want to go to an elite program and you're in that position, you go there, because at Kansas they treat the kids like they're kings. The challenge with Kansas is everybody thinks that the hammer is going to get dropped on them this summer by the NCAA. But Kansas and Kentucky is just not the same. Like,
let me read you this quote. Let me read you this quote from Sharman's agent in this athletic story. He wants to play for a winner. He wants the big stage. He wants the exposure, Walden said. He wants someone who is going to coach him hard and develop to become an NBA player. Check box. Whether that's this year or next year. He wants to play with other really good players because that unlocks him. He wants to showcase his versatility. Okay, whatever. How many of those, he wants to play for a winner. Does Nebraska check that box? No.
Sure.
He wants the big stage. Does Nebraska check that box?
Yes. Absolutely they do.
Okay.
Sure.
Locally,
on
it's
TV how big of a stage do you want?
It's not as there are
Big
bigger
Ten
stages.
basketball versus the SEC.
There are bigger stages.
There's
There are bigger stages.
Sure,
There are
yes.
bigger
Okay.
stages. He wants the. It's just that I'm worried
No,
about.
read the next one.
He
'cause
wants the
next one is-
exposure. It's
okay. Now the one after that.
the NBA. The coach, the person who can coach him and develop into an NBA player. Yes,
That's Hoiberg.
That's Hoiberg.
Hoiberg
For
over
sure.
certainly over the Kentucky Calipari.
I mean, he turns
he doesn't
him
do
out.
any coaching. He recruits the team, and then they run a dribble drive system
Right.
that's not even like the NBA.
I understand. I just
If
think
there's one thing that Hoiberg can actually say is, listen, I know what the NBA takes. I took Delano Banton, who nobody knew, and got him in the second round. Bryce McGowan's is going to probably go in the first round.
The concern for
so
me
one
would
thing
be-
Fred does is get
but
guys
if you
in the NBA.
is it, does it help you? Like, what if it's a 10,
I get it.
13 win situation again? How much does that help you?
Yeah, I get it.
I don't know.
I totally get it. And we've watched, you and I have both watched, and you too, have watched enough NBA to know that Kentucky players turn out to be elite about 4 years into their career because they didn't learn anything. Like, how many years did it take Booker to get where he is?
Right.
How many years did it take Jamal Murray to be as good as he is?
Right.
De'Aaron Fox still can't shoot.
Yeah.
And De'Aaron Fox in 3 years is probably going to be all NBA. Like, it takes these guys years to learn it because the one thing they don't get there is, like, how to play in the NBA. Who from Kentucky was great in the first year they were at the NBA? Anthony Davis? I don't know.
Anthony Davis
Was he
was
great?
great.
Yeah.
Carl Towns,
good.
pretty good.
Okay.
Still
Carl-
have
the most gifted
still have
player
my
that,
beefs
that
with him, but
Calipari's
yeah.
ever had.
yeah.
Anthony Davis is probably the best player he's ever had in
Yeah.
terms of his athleticism, but Carl Anthony Towns is easily the most gifted. Like, he can do
Yeah.
anything. Grant, you're right. Carl Anthony Towns is
And
that
even
name.
him, like, he's had some rough playoff games in this Memphis series.
But you know what I'm saying.
John Wall was pretty good.
John Wall, another
He
good one.
wasn't great right away when he was okay when he got to the pros. He could shoot.
Still can't shoot.
De'Aaron Fox couldn't shoot. Still can't shoot.
Yeah.
Like, If there's one thing I would say is that you can actually get to be a pretty good anyway.
I think you could, but Calipari would say, like,
getting
hey,
off on a
look at,
tangent,
but
which is
Calipari
fine.
could point
My
to
fault.
Daniel
Oh, yeah.
Orton, who was like a backup center at Kentucky on one of those teams, and said, hey, look what he was. I think he was a first-round draft pick or close to it. One of the years they had like 5 or 6 picks. And would he have been a first-round draft pick if he hadn't gone to Kentucky?
point.
I don't know.
It's a great point. You're right. We should have a conversation sometime about how long it takes Kentucky players
It's
to
great.
get good in
No,
the
it's a
NBA.
really good point. It's a really good point. A lot of the big,
It's the conversation
takes
a lot
a
of other
long-
a
programs
lot of
would
these
like to
blue
have.
bloods. Yeah. Well, that's another great point. It's it's a conversation that a lot of other programs
And
would
it's
love to have.
kind of true about Kansas, too. The best player in the NBA, I don't think Joel Embiid is the best player in the NBA,
He's
but
on the list.
But he's the MVP.
Yeah.
It took him 4 years because he was hurt when he was at Kansas, and he was hurt in the NBA. But I think Fred Hoiberg actually does a pretty good job of getting guys ready for that league.
For sure.
It's one thing he does. Baylor Shireman's going to Nebraska.
All right.
I'm calling my shot.
It's a bold prediction.
Well, we got to end it on that. We got to end it on that.
Let's end it on
So we got portal happenings this week. We have the NFL draft this weekend. We have basketball things happening. Power struggles between Kentucky and Nebraska. Should be great.
I love Jimmy's perspective, whereas
Yeah,
like because
I do too.
he's
I
not
do
from
too.
this podunk place, and I'm from here, so I get to say that. Like the Midwest is the Midwest is the Midwest is the Midwest is the Midwest. The kid went to South Dakota State. I just don't see him going to Kentucky or UCLA. I think if you want to pick a Midwestern school, you go to Kansas. I'll be a Jayhawk. You know how many kids from Nebraska have ever played for Kentucky? I don't think there's
Very
been
few,
one.
if any. Probably not.
I just don't think there's been one. I just
No.
think it's a hard. You know how many Nebraska kids have played for Kansas? More than a few.
More than a few.
There you go.
Thanks for listening. We will talk to you guys later.